by everyone. Okay, so we're going to start our session of learning, and we dedicate this session. This is Geraldine. Can you please say this is the yard site? Go ahead.
Today is my mother's yard site. Well, it's sort of over by now. It was last night and today. It's 26 years. I can't believe it. It was like a blink. And there was a blizzard that day. Anyway, her name is Chaya Bas Arya Vishaindel.
Right, Zichrona Livracha. May her memory always be a source of blessing, and her memory is going to be part of what feeds us this evening as we start studying together.
Thank you. She would be very honored.
So the Torah reading is the beginning of the book of Shemot, and that's the second book of the 5 books of the Torah, and it's called Exodus in English, and it begins our story of our sojourn in Egypt as a people. We multiply, and we're we flourish, and we become not just a nice big extended clan, but we become a real people, a nation, an am. We're called an am, a people for the first time. A nation for the first time is in our Torah reading in multiple ways. I pointed that out in the Torah Sparks. And then our flourishing comes back to sort of bite us, and it causes envy and fear on the part of the rulers of Egypt, who then create a system of oppression, enslavement, and murder to stamp out the people, genocide. And the story tracks the elements of disobedience that take place, and to the great credit of a number of women, the midwives and Pharaoh's own daughter. Thanks to Pharaoh's daughter, Moses survives, and Moses becomes the leader of the Jewish people. He has the amazing encounter at the burning bush, and then he goes back to Egypt. He's already created his own family because he had to run away to Midian. There's a tremendous amount of stuff in the Torah reading, and we have a very long back and forth between Moses and God, because Moses doesn't want to be the leader of the Jewish people, and it's basically the longest conversation back and forth, the longest dialogue between a human being and God in the entire Torah. It's so typical, right, of a human being trying to get out of God, of doing what God wants. So that's what we have. But in the end, of course, he agrees, and he goes into Egypt and starts appearing and projecting God's word, both to his own people, to the Israelites, and also to Pharaoh. And of course, by the end of our Torah reading, things don't look so great. Pharaoh is not impressed, and Pharaoh actually makes life worse for the Hebrew slaves. And then the Hebrew slaves themselves complain to Moses, "Boy, thanks a lot. You made life even worse for us. Who asked you to be such a troublemaker?" And Moses turns to God, and God says, "Wait and see." And that leaves us on the cliff, hanging off the cliff, waiting for next week's Torah reading to see how things will continue to work out. So that's it. Of course, one thing, just as we were talking about people's partisan stubbornness, there's a phrase for that in our Torah reading. We have it first in this Torah portion, and it continues to be repeated a number of times into the next 2 Torah readings. Hardness of heart, right? That people are hard-hearted, and it doesn't matter what you say, they're not gonna budge. They're not gonna, give an inch. It's very tragic. Okay, that's the Torah reading. So now we turn, as we are doing, that's our project for this year. We turn to the Haftarah, to the prophetic reading. So the prophetic reading is found on page 343 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, and it starts with Isaiah, chapter 27, verse 6, and it's actually a little bit of a collage it has the last part of chapter 27. Then it goes into some verses from chapter 28, but that it doesn't finish chapter 28. And then it goes into chapter 29, and it gives a few verses from chapter 29 after skipping the beginning of chapter 29, and only doing a few verses from chapter 29. So it's an edited composition that takes 3 consecutive chapters, but only selections from those 3 chapters in the book of Isaiah. Historically speaking, it looks like we're talking about early Isaiah. So we're talking about sometime before 722 BCE. And that means that the northern kingdom called Ephraim, we had this kind of designation earlier. Ephraim is still functioning. It's still, a state. But we're going to see that in our Torah reading, there's back and forth about what what's going to happen to the Jewish people. So we're at chapter 27 in Isaiah, verse 6, 343 in the Eitz Chaim. Okay, I'd like to invite somebody to read. Geraldine, how about reading this?
Okay. In days to come, Jacob shall strike root, Israel shall sprout and blossom, and the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. Was he beaten as his beater has been?
Wait, let's stop just with
Okay.
that first verse. Oh, just again, by the way, get ready for very, very difficult language. This is very, hard to unpack, poetic, elusive, metaphoric kinds of language. And the notes sometimes give us, well, maybe it's referring to this, maybe it's saying this, maybe this is the syntax, maybe not. It goes and this first verse is an example. We have in days to come. The in days is in brackets, right? You can see that, right? In Hebrew, it's Habaim Yashresh Yaakov. The word Habaim means the coming ones, right? But what coming ones? What is it referring to? And then it says Yashresh Yaakov, right? Yaakov will take root. So what's with the Habaim? So that's why most people say it means Habaim in the future, in the coming days, Jacob will take root and be established, right? And then flourish and sprout, right? Spread out and be full of fruit and goodness, right? So this is a positive vision for Jacob, and Jacob, of course, doesn't mean Jacob. Jacob means all of the Jewish people, right? So here we have, again, just like in the book of Exodus itself, where Jacob turns from being an individual, from being a patriarch, to being a signifier for an entire people. And you have this idea that they're going to be just, growing and blossoming amazingly. There is, and I'm trying to see here, if you look at the very end of the note at the bottom, toward the bottom of the page, the first note. So if you see that whole paragraph, it goes alternatively. Can you see where it says alternatively toward the second half of the paragraph? In days to come,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Right. So then you skip a bunch of lines, and then it goes alternatively.
Alternatively, the word Habaim has been understood as the coming or ingathering of Israel to its homeland. Such a reading would juxtapose the Israelites' arrival in Egypt to their return from future exile and bondage. Right,
so that becomes a kind of a parallelism, but an ironic parallelism. If we turn to the beginning of the book of Shemot, at 317 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, right? Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. So we have in the Hebrew, ve'ela Shemot, that's how we get the word Shemot, B'nai Yisrael, these are the names of the children of Israel, Haba'im, Mitzrayim. So
Okay.
there's that same word, right? Haba'im, who are coming, arriving to Egypt. And then it gives us the 12 sons of Jacob, and then it starts talking about what? About the flourishing and about the having more fruit and about growing and growing and growing and multiplying. So there is a kind of a parallelism between this very first verse and the beginning of our Torah reading, but it's a very paradoxical or ironic kind of parallelism, right? Right. I said so, so it's right. But how so? Does anybody want to fill in? What's the paradox?
Well, in the Torah reading, it says that they were flourishing, but then immediately it says that they become enslaved. That the new king didn't know them and actually saw them as a threat, and wanted to avert the threat by enslaving them. So that good fortune quickly turns around.
So why is the flourishing in the Torah reading the prelude for something bad, while the flourishing in our Haftarah is the culmination of something good?
Well, in the Torah reading, it's because that flourishing was viewed with suspicion.
Why?
Because thinking that there were so many of them that they're going to take over.
Because it's not in the Holy Land. It's not in their own home. They're other, right? They are foreigners. And that, of course, as we know so well, that's why it is met with suspicion. That's why there's all this, fear and resentment and so on that gets created, because all of this coming into the land and then flourishing, it's the wrong land. It's not the land that we're supposed to be in, right? And of course, that's at the very end of the book of Genesis, when Joseph says, eventually we have to get out of here, right? We will get out of here, and don't forget me when you get out of here, right? So there's that's the very concluding message of the previous book. And now, instead of getting out of there,
We're there.
we're there and we're staying there, and we're rooting ourselves, right? The word that Yashresh, we're actually taking root in the land of Goshen. We're very comfortable, and we have it good. Why should we leave? And let's understand, we weren't slaves in the beginning. We had theoretically an option, if somebody would have woken up and mobilized the people to say, okay, the famine is over. We're a pretty well off now community. Let's go back home. But we didn't, right? So here, though, this is the homecoming. This is the settling down that will eventually happen. This is the prophetic vision that one day we will flourish in our own home without all the ups and downs that we suffer. And believe me, the ups and downs will be vividly conveyed in our Haftarah, in this prophetic portion. But that's this first vision that in the end, spoiler alert, in the end, it'll all be okay. Okay? So now we keep on going.
Was
What
he
page are we on? I'm sorry. What?
343 in the Eitz Chaim,
Thank you.
Isaiah 27, and now we're verse 7.
7? Was he beaten as his beater has been? Did he suffer such slaughter as his slayers? Assailing them with fury unchained, his pitiless blast bore them off on a day of gale.
Okay, so that's very clear. Doesn't require any explanation at all. But we have here, I always kvetch about the translations that we have. Here, I have to acknowledge that the translation tries to actually give us a flavor of the Hebrew. And the alliteration, the sound that keeps repeating from one word to the next, is captured in the English as an attempt to give us a flavor of the Hebrew, right? Was he beaten as his beater has been? did he suffer such slaughter as his slayers? So we've got the buzz, and then we've got the s, right? We don't have s yet. We have it in verse 8, but here we have hakemakat makehu hikahu. That's the first phrase of verse 7. Im kehereg harugav horag. Right. So the word is twisted and repeated, in different forms. So the rhetorical question that is asked by the prophet is, at least in one way of understanding it, and you have notes here. We're not going to be able to pay attention to every single note, the ambiguities and the possible other interpretations, but acknowledging that Jacob was beaten once, but how does that compare to how his oppressors have now been beaten? Right? In other words, you think we had it bad? Look at now the comeuppance that has been suffered by the people who tried to do us dirty, right? So that's the kind of, so it's this triumphant idea that yes, we suffered a lot, but it's nothing compared to what is being now, doled out to the bad guys, right? Fury unchained. Okay. So, all right, and of course, eventually, that's what happens with Egypt, right? I mean, I don't want to give away too much of what the Torah readings will give us in the next couple of weeks, but that's what's going to happen. Okay, here we go. Verse 9.
Assuredly, by this alone shall Jacob's sin be purged away. This is the only price for removing his guilt, that he make all the altar stones like shattered blocks of chalk, with no sacred post left standing, nor any incense altar.
Nor any incense altar. Okay, so what is the what there's a condition here, says the prophet. If you want this flourishing to happen, and if you want your oppressors to get their due punishment, there's only one thing that I require of you, Jacob, to do. What do you have to do?
Is this like talking about Israelite high places and such, like
Yeah.
our altars to other deities?
Yeah. The one condition is you have to clean up your own act. If you want God to redeem you and to cleanse you, then you have to do that. You can't expect God to be your champion if you're constantly rejecting God and you're constantly running after the local deities. Well, then the local deities you can have them, but then the local people will just make your life miserable. So here you have this idea. No, you have to strike down all of your own idolatry and idolatrous practices. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, thus fortified cities lie desolate, homesteads deserted, forsaken like a wilderness. There calves graze, there they lie down and consume its boughs. When its crown is withered, they break. Women come and make fires with them, for they are a people without understanding. That is why their maker will show them no mercy. Their creator will deny them grace.
Okay, so this is
Wow.
the vision, the opposite vision, right? The first part of the vision is beautiful, fruitful, flourishing, but if you want to be engaged in that kind of idolatry, which is the commitment of the oppressors themselves, then in the end you'll pay for it and they will pay for it. Whether they pay for it, and therefore you benefit is a different story. If you want to join with them, then you will be part of the same desolation. Right? You will also suffer the same emptiness because of your commitment to worshiping idols. So no mercy. And I would say, it's since we know the story, of the Exodus, the Israelite subjugation in Egypt, and then what happened in order to get them out. This idea of this, like, no mercy to the ones that do not serve God, right? Pharaoh will be dealt with the harshest kind of measures, and then the question is, what about us? Will we be included in that suffering? We'll be included in that punishment or not? It's one of the things that's not quite so clear in our Torah readings, right? What is actually the religious behavior of the Israelites all during the time that they are in Egypt? We don't have any discussion of that at all. We have Moses, when he has his long, conversation, as I said, the longest conversation in the Torah
with God.
He says, well, what am I going to tell them? Are they really going to believe me? Are they really going to accept what I say? And who should I say sent me? Right? So you have this whole idea that I am the God of your parents. I am the God of your ancestors. We have this a little bit of a hint of an illusion that Moses, you've heard about me. Your parents have told you about me. Everybody, your whole community knows about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there is at least some kind of evidence that this is not coming out of a vacuum, right? But we don't really have any pictures of Hebrew life among themselves. We have them calling out to God or moaning or giving up, but it's not. There is no discussion about did they accept Egyptian deities or not. That we don't have. But in this later period, the period where Isaiah is talking about, where supposedly here we are in the promised land and everything that God promised us is fulfilled, guess what we do? We turn our backs on God, and here it's clear again and again and again and again that even though we have it all handed to us on a silver platter, we turn our backs on God. Jen, you wanted to say something?
Only that if we had like completely gone over to Egyptian gods and intermarried as much, and it's unlikely, it feels like we wouldn't be seen as such a distinct people any longer. So it's hard to imagine that, we wouldn't have just blended by then if that were the case.
So that's unfortunate. I mean, that's a very, very important point in terms of the experience of Jews throughout history. How long does it take for a Jew to disappear? If they want to.
2 generations in my family.
So, well, that it also depends on disappear into what, where, how open is the society that you're trying to disappear into to let you disappear. So, in Europe, it wasn't that easy. You didn't disappear that fast. 2 generations was not enough time. People, oh, look at that person going to church. That deacon, guess what? He's really a Jew. It's stuck with Jews for a long, long time. I remember a very bitter joke that's a play on words. We say in our prayers on Yom Kippur, we say, "Elokai ad shelo notzarti eini chidai, v'achshav shenotzarti ki'ilu lo notzarti." Before I was created, notzarti, I wasn't worthy to be created. I didn't deserve to be created. And now that I have been created anyway, it's as if I weren't created. What have I done? What am I? Who am I? What have I accomplished in this world? What have I contributed to this world? What have I done with my life? So it's this very abject pouring out of one's prayers to God, saying, I know that, like the other joke, not the joke I'm going to tell now, the other joke. I'm a nothing. I'm a nothing and unworthy. Have mercy on me anyway. So I really can't remember the guy's name, but he was a very, very well-known convert in Russia. In Russia, of course, there was quotas. You couldn't go to university. You couldn't go into certain professions. And this guy was, I think, a doctor, a medical, professor. He wanted to teach. He wanted to get ahead. He was brilliant. And I wish I could remember who he was, because he was very, very, known. But he converted. He joined the Russian Orthodox, Christian church, and that's why he was able to get ahead. But he was very prominent because he was so talented and so on. So but he always, behind the scenes, he acted on behalf of the Jewish people. If he could put a good word in to try to ameliorate some terrible decision that was about to happen, some policy, somebody needed some help, somebody was in trouble, whatever, he was always there for the Jews, and the Jews knew it. And he was like their secret agent, right? He was like their mole, so to speak. But he had abandoned the Jewish people. So they said to him once, so what's the whole deal with you? What kind of creature are you? And he said those words in Hebrew. He said, Ad shelo notzarti eini chedai. Until I became a Notzri, a Nazarene, a Christian, I was worth nothing. And now that I became a Christian, kilu lo notzarti. It's as if I never became a Christian. So, once a Jew, always a Jew. So it's definitely a recurrent question in Jewish history, how much we can abandon our, wash away our Jewish identity, whether, if we want to or if we're forced to, and when people, don't let us forget it. What was, unfortunately, what was the Nazi policy was it went back generations. It didn't matter what you thought you were. If you had a Jewish grandparent, that's it, right? You couldn't run away from it. So, okay, back to here. Verse 12.
And in that day, the Lord will beat out the peoples like grain from the channel of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, and you shall be picked up one by one, O children of Israel.
Okay, so here we have an explicit mention of Egypt. This is God's sway, God's power will go all the way from east to west, right? From Mesopotamia all the way to Egypt, and you will be plucked up one by one, right? So the grain that you are a part of is this whole massive field of all these other peoples. They will be threshed and beaten. You will be plucked up and saved, right? And let's go one more verse, and this verse is also a Rosh Hashanah verse.
And in that day, a great ram's horn shall be sounded, and the strayed who are in the land of Assyria and the expelled who are in the land of Egypt shall come and worship the Lord on the holy mount in Jerusalem.
Okay, so here we have again this extension from Assyria all the way to Egypt. All of the the people that have been strewn all over the place will be able to finally come back to the promised land and worship God, bow down to God on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. So besides the explicit mention of Egypt, any other links that we make to the Torah reading? So let's not wait too long here. Let's, if we can, just for a second, turn back to Exodus, chapter 3, if you have it available, page 329. So 11 verses 11 and 12.
You
Okay.
get it.
Carolyn, you got it?
Yes. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And he said, I will be with you. That shall be your sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain.
Okay, sound familiar? What do we have back here again? The end of verse 13 in Isaiah, chapter 27.
And the strayed who are in the land of Assyria and the expelled who are in the land of Egypt shall come and worship the Lord on the holy mount in Jerusalem.
So we have again two promises of people who have been exiled, who have been dispersed into Ashur, not so interesting for us right now, and Egypt. They will come to worship God. Where? On a holy mountain.
On the holy mount in Jerusalem. And you
So which is the holy mountain that's mentioned in our Torah reading? Mount Sinai.
That's it.
Yeah.
So that's what God says. The sign is, I'm going to get you out of Egypt, and you're going to make it all the way back to this mountain where you have your own personal revelation now with the burning bush. And this is just between you and me. But guess what? I promise you will succeed in taking all of the people. That's some screensaver you got there. So yeah. So God says, and you're going to come, the whole, not just you, all of the people will come to this mountain and worship me. And again, we have this like juxtaposition. Yeah, absolutely. The juxtaposition of two different places where we have a positive experience, right? The flourishing in Egypt, the flourishing in our own homeland. Going now to Mount Sinai, which is not in the promised land. It's not in the boundaries of the promised land in any description of the boundaries in the Bible. Mount Sinai is outside the promised land. That's where we are going to worship God because we haven't gotten to the promised land yet. But now, says Isaiah, all of these glimmers of hope and all of these positive things that we've experienced in the past will finally take root, literally, Yashresh Yaakov, they'll take root, they'll be for good, right? When we say for good, that's going to last. That's part of, we always want goodness to last. Jewish history too many times has goodness as something fleeting. This time the good will be for good. This time it'll really actually be accomplished. Like I say, verse 13 is one of the verses that we use in the shofarot section of Rosh Hashanah, where we say here that the shofar, the great shofar will be sounded. That's the shofar of our redemption. Okay, good. And now that's the end of chapter 27. And now we go into chapter 28, but we are not going to do everything in chapter 28. I mean, in the Haftarah, just the first few verses. Go ahead.
Ah, the proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim.
How do you say in Hebrew?
It says, hoi.
Oy, right? I don't know why the translation didn't want to leave it like that. But yeah. So yeah, all right. Go ahead. The proud crowns. Go ahead.
Wait. So I'll say it in Hebrew. Hoi. The proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is but wilted flowers on the heads of men bloated with rich food, who are overcome by wine.
Right?
Lo,
What kind of image do we have here?
Drunken and slovenly, but wealthy, I guess.
And who? Who is this?
Yeah. Northern Israel.
Yeah, this is Ephraim. So this is us, right? So after all of this, like, saying, oh, God is going to save the Jewish people and bring everybody back to the land, and it's all going to be so wonderful, and it's going to be with bounteous flourishing and all of this wonderful, positive, rich imagery. Now we come back to the reality right now, and the rich imagery that people are enjoying, they think they have it already, right? They think that they're fine, and they're drunk on their good fortune. The economy is doing great, for them, and they're just so impressed with their own wealth and with their own success and with their own pleasure that they're able to enjoy. So this is the present reality of the people that God is hoping that Isaiah will shock into repentance. Now, this is, again, is this hard-heartedness? Is this going to work? Is this going to change anybody's mind? Can anybody actually hear this? It's not, it's not clear that it'll work. And let's go a little bit further now into what they say.
Lo, my Lord is something strong and mighty, like a storm of hail, a shower of pestilence. Something like a storm of massive torrential rain shall be hurled with force to the ground. Trampled underfoot shall be the proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, the wilted flowers on the heads of men bloated with rich food that are his glorious beauty. They shall be like an early fig before the fruit harvest. Whoever sees it devours it while it is still in his hand.
Okay, so any links that we can make with our Torah reading? If we think of our Torah reading as continuous with next week and the week after?
The plagues.
Yeah, right. That's the bitter irony, right? We've gone through all of this before, but it was for the bad guys, right? We're supposed to be the good guys.
Yeah.
And that's what Isaiah says. It's all God has this in God's repertoire. And instead of it being the Egyptians who will suffer this, it will be you. And you get this kind of like the wilted flowers, right? This idea of like this, this rotting or this, death of something that was once beautiful, that was once so promising. It's a very, a very bitter kind of image, bloated with rich food. Right. I can't help myself, but I think backwards. I think about the the fat cows and the skinny cows. Also, that these people who are so stuffed with their wealth, in the end, it's not going to work too well at all. Okay, 5. Bayomahu.
In that day, the Lord of hosts shall become a crown of beauty and a diadem of glory for the remnant of his people, and a spirit of judgment for him who sits in judgment, and of valor for those who repel attacks at the gate.
Okay, so here now we had these phrases before. If you look back at 28 verse 1, right, we have proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is but wilted flowers. The Hebrew ateret geut tzitz novel tzvi tifarto. And here we have now Hashem tzvakot ateret tzvi v'litzfirat tifara. Right, so these are the same kinds of words. So what you think you're going to be crowned with, which will wilt and wither away, no, God will be the real crown. Not your material, showy kind of stuff. God will be the crown for whoever's left. Whoever actually escapes this punishment, whoever maintains loyalty to God. And what do we have here? Spirit of judgment for the person who sits in judgment, the person who's dedicated to keeping things right and fair. That's going to be the glory. God will be a crown for such a person. Okay. 7.
But these are also muddled by wine and dazed by liquor. Priest and prophet are muddled by liquor. They are confused by wine. They are dazed by liquor. They are muddled in their visions. They stumble in judgment. Yea, all tables are covered with vomit and filth, so that no space is left.
Right. This is the Kiddush is not good. Right. So, but the people who are being accused here and the people that are being condemned, priests and prophets, not the masses, they're following instruction, they're following leaders. The leaders are corrupt, leaders are completely debauched, and can never do what's right. And of course, the whole story with Pharaoh is about a people who suffers grievously because of a corrupt, spiritually corrupt, messed up ruler. The rulers bring the trouble to their people. Okay, let's keep going.
Wait a minute, I just think that it's interesting that 28 starts with the secular leaders, but it isn't just them. It's also the religious leaders.
Right. And it makes you wonder, is this priest a priest to God, or is this a priest for Baal or for Asherah? Is that prophet a prophet who thinks that
Both.
he's serving what?
Or both, maybe,
Right. And we have it in the prophets. We have competing prophets. No, I'm saying God's word. No, I'm saying God's word. Right. And how do you tell? Okay. And of course, that's part of what Moses says. Are they going to believe me? Are they going to take me as a reliable prophet? Okay. 9.
To whom would he give instruction? To whom expound a message? To those newly weaned from milk just taken away from the breast? That same mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur, now here, now there.
Let's go to the end here.
Truly, as one who speaks to that people in a stammering jargon and an alien tongue, is he who declares to them, this is the resting place, let the weary rest. This is the place of repose. They refuse to listen. To them, the word of the Lord is mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur, now here, now there, and so they will march, but they shall fall backward and be injured and snared and captured.
Okay. So the translation tries to give a sense of the Hebrew, and it's repeated both in verse 10 and then again in verse 13. Tzav la tzav, kav la kav, ze'er sham, ze'er sham. Right. So whether it's, and the word tzav could also be a commandment, like a mitzvah, right? God's words. Oh, we have this rule and this rule and this rule. It's we have to. Everything is so picayune. Everything is so unimportant, small-minded. We have here the voice of people who are rejecting other prophets or even Isaiah's previous efforts. I've tried to talk sense to you. I've tried to give you a vision, right? I've tried to say, this is the resting place. This is the real place where you will be able to have security and spiritual replenishment. But you just don't want to hear it, do you? You're saying, oh yeah, blah, 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 yada, 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 right? That's tzav la tzav, kav la kav, yeah. So we have, a very dispiriting picture of the response, of the reactions of the populace themselves, who cannot listen. They cannot hear it. And of course, again, back into our Torah reading, that's Moses' fear. And even though they begin to believe in him in this week's Torah reading, to spoil it again for next week, by next week, they don't believe him. They can't hear him anymore. They go, leave us alone. This is, you're just, getting in the way. Let us do what we have to do and what we want to do. And we don't care anymore. Let's just read real quick. It's a little late, but let's read the ending, because the ending gets a little more positive. We skip the rest of chapter 28 and we skip the first half of chapter 29. And we just read a few selected verses to get us in a better mood by the end of the Haftarah.
Assuredly, thus said the Lord to the house of Jacob, who redeemed Abraham, no more shall Jacob be shamed, no longer his face grow pale. For when he, that is his children, behold what my hands have wrought in his midst, they will hallow my name. Men will hallow the Holy One of Jacob and stand in awe of the God of Israel.
They will do tshuva. They will get it in the end. We don't have time to look at what this means about the children. But of course, the children are a major concern in our Torah reading also, right? That's how Pharaoh wants to destroy the Jewish people. And that's, of course, every parent's gigantic care. And here, somehow or other, maybe it is the children who give a sense of hope back to the people and get them back, to sanctify God's name. V'hikdishu et Kedosh Yaakov et Elokei Yisrael Yaritzu. And then finally come back to God. All right, so we'll leave it here for now. And hopefully we'll see each other again. Okay?
Thank you.
Both-
Yasikoa.